Everybody, thank you ever so much for joining our webinar today. I am Trevor Manners. I am the sales director at Example IT. Today, for our perspective, we've got a very strong and very passionate relationship we've got with Yayo Messaging, and we're very pleased to be bringing this webinar to you today. Please feel free to use the Q&A section to ask any questions, and at the end we will answer those questions as they come in and so forth today. So introducing the Yayo team, with me today we have Alan, Christo and Sarah, the leadership team behind Yayo Messaging, a platform redefining secure communication in business. Please team, say hello.
Hi.
Hi everybody.
Good morning.
Hi. Nice to meet you, everybody.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So we will set the scene to understand what we're talking today, the challenges that we're highlighting, which organisations are seeing on a day-to-day basis. So from our joint perspective, there's so much has changed in the way that we communicate at work, remote work, mobile first tools, and the rise in cyber threats that are changing the game on a consistent daily basis. But what really is at risk when messaging isn't secure, which is such an important topic to discuss today, and that's the things that we're going to be bringing forward to. So today we're going to be talking about real world events, common pitfalls, and what organizations can actually do about these rising challenges and the ever evolving landscape that we face. And then we're going to talk about how Yayo can help solve those challenges that you are experiencing. So I'm going to hand over now to Alan.
Hi. Great. Good morning, everybody. Basically, let's go straight in and talk about one of the most advertised issues that we've had recently, and that's with Marks and Spencers. Marks and Spencers were penetrated through a very sophisticated attack that was basically phishing and impersonation. So they tricked using IT credentials. They tricked personnel within Marks and Spencers into resetting credentials, and it granted them full access. They basically then deployed ransomware on VM servers, and they crippled their online ordering, contact payments, and even their warehouse logistics. M&S responded very quickly. They shut down their critical systems. They called in CrowdStrike, they called in Microsoft, and they reported to UK cybercrime units. But it resulted in heavy financial damage, over 400 million in loss, and they were insured for 100 million. So their net loss is well over 300 million, but it also wiped off 1 billion in its profit, in its market value immediately. So what's the result of that is MS are now forced to accelerate its IT overhaul, and they basically face regulatory fines as well. With the new cyber security legislation coming through, they would have had much heavier fines than what is expected to happen. The interesting thing about that is it then spawned a whole bunch of phishing attacks on the account holders from Marks and Spencers. So the impact keeps going deeper and deeper and deeper. And all of this could have been avoided if they actually managed their communications and they had an authenticated network. So it would have stopped phishing and it would have stopped bad actors day one. So we can get into more detail about how Yayo would have operated in that specific environment a bit later. But it's really critical to understand how social engineering, direct phishing and spear phishing attacks can penetrate very easily into, or enable penetration very easily into any business today. And then on the flip side of that, we've got use of consumer-based messaging applications in government. And we've had recently Signalgate, which was absolutely ridiculous when you've got senior officials using consumer-grade messaging applications for highly confidential information. And there are so many instances of that, going back to Boris Johnson, Labour members last year being banned from the party, etc., etc. Okay, with that, I'll hand over to Christo to add more.
Yeah, I was just going to add one little piece on that thing, which is around the social engineering. You know, in the good old days, people used to just send you a link, and then you'd accidentally click on the link, and then essentially you would be caught up in this cyber sort of threat scenario. But the truth of the situation is that they're now using social engineering. And Alan, when we were doing the research around Marks and Spencer's, we noticed people talking about using LinkedIn. They really tried to understand the individuals that they were targeting before they actually spoofed them with whatever it was. And I think that's where people have to take a view on how clever the cyber threats have become. And this whole area around, spear phishing, social engineering, phishing itself, this has become a really sophisticated attack on corporate customers, and one has to be really cautious about those. So, Trevor, the other thing I think is an important point to bring up is this whole issue around, using consumer grade messaging apps and how they play in the role associated with essentially, corporate environments. And I know a lot of corporates, they spend a lot of money on things like Slack, and they spend money on Teams, and they build that corporate infrastructure. But one of the things that I'm seeing when I speak to corporates is ultimately people that are out there in the field, they're not necessarily using the Teams of the world and the Slacks of the world. And this is predominantly because they're in that mobile world. And because they're mobile, essentially they prefer to use things that they're used to using, which are technologies like WhatsApp, Signal, and Telegram. And the reality is, from a corporate IT perspective, this is exceptionally dangerous. And it's dangerous for a number of reasons. But the first and most important thing is what Alan always calls control, 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 which is essentially the IT department now loses control. So any conversation that I was having, let's say with Sarah, around sales or whatever it might be, if I leave the company, all of those conversations are not recorded within the company. They're actually between myself and Sarah, because I used a consumer grade app to actually talk to Sarah. And all of that company confidential information, be it pricing, be it, technology information, IP information, all of that would be between myself and Sarah, and the company would not know any one of those conversations. And I think this is where this whole idea of saying, encryption, and encryption is going to protect me. But from an IT perspective, encryption is just one component. What's really important is that essentially those messages that are happening between yourself and essentially the corporate customer are actually sitting on IT infrastructure, and making sure that IT infrastructure is essentially one that is under the control of the IT departments that are there. And that allows them to make sure that essentially they're controlling, all the information.
Yeah, Christo, one thing, just going back to that Marks and Spencer's thing, it was social media engineering that allowed them to penetrate in the first place. They pulled together credentials and associations through LinkedIn, and then they used a combination of email and messaging actually to force the error in order to access that system. They're not using many corporate-based systems in order to communicate, because they're coming from outside and trying to do the penetration. So I think even there needs to be more awareness of what we're putting on things like LinkedIn as individuals, and also bear in mind the social applications or consumer applications like WhatsApp, etc. They're open to anybody, so anybody can actually come in and impersonate, and there's no validation of credentials whatsoever at that point.
Especially now with the news that WhatsApp will be adding ads into WhatsApp. So within your message threads, you will now have ads, and yet they say they don't listen to conversations and they're not going to be spying, let's call it, on your one-to-one communication, and yet you'll still be served ads on something that you'll most likely be discussing, which I find quite funny.
And they will be miraculously targeted ads.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So with all of those kind of concerns that you mentioned, consumer products and the applications that potential users are using on a day-to-day basis away from the messaging platforms that the company may instill, what does this mean for businesses then? Because it does sound like we're a bit out of control in that aspect.
Yeah, so let me take that one. So I think there's a couple of things there, Trevor, from a business perspective that one has to consider. So the reality is the first thing is sort of the acceptance that instant messaging is a primary mechanism for communication. People are using consumer grade tools today because really they're comfortable with those tools, and they've almost built in those reflexes to use technologies like WhatsApp, Telegram, and Signal, and they like those technologies because they find them easy, and there is this perception that those kind of technologies give them that instant response. The clue's in the name, instant messaging. So I think the first thing is the acceptance that instant messaging is a platform and a technology that people use aggressively. And it doesn't matter whether you are in sales, engineering, accounting, marketing, you use those technologies. The second thing, which is really important to understand, is I call it the blurring of the lines, is this idea of using social technologies or consumer technologies in the business context puts the business at risk, because essentially you're using a consumer product for a business environment. And this blurring of these two lines, one, creates a lot of confusion, but more importantly, like I was talking about earlier, is it takes control away from the IT department. And it's that scenario that's causing problems. And we've had some very good examples, particularly in the banking sector, where there's been fines levied on the FSA. And we've had examples where the Scottish government, the French government, they've all banned using those kind of technologies because they have concerns around consumer grade technology. So what is the important thing to consider, I guess? So the first thing is that you want to make sure who you're talking to. So this whole thing around cyber attacks, one way you can really start controlling cyber attacks is, one, make sure you have a closed network. So an invite-only network. So you're not going to use your address book that you have on your telephone in order to invite somebody. Your IT department's going to invite people to join a particular network, and then they'll be invited, and therefore they become a trusted individual, and then you start eliminating some of these cyber attacks. The second piece is going back to the point I made on the introduction here, which was around auditability. It's absolutely critical that if a company wants to control communications, that they have a mechanism in place where they can physically audit those conversations. It's a bit like when you phone your bank. You phone your bank and the first thing they say to you is, hey guys, I'm going to be recording this message for training purposes. Well, we know it's not really for training purposes. Why they're recording it is to protect themselves. And it's the same thing. If your employees are having conversations and they're having conversations with customers, you might want to record those conversations to make sure that you get yourself into a situation where you are compliant. Those fines that were levied on those banks, and they're substantial, they're going to the millions and millions and millions of dollars. They were levied by the Financial Conduct Authority because the statement is from the Financial Conduct Authority is that the bank has to be in control of all its communications with its individuals. Now, for companies which are not in the banking world, the whole issue is around GDPR. And if you're medical, it's HIPAA. So it's around how do you control and have that auditability that's important to control what you're doing. And then there's this last point that I think is critical that people need to consider in the corporate space, which is there is a lot of things that are changing in the IT industry. So we talked a lot about social engineering, but coupled with social engineering, you have this whole thing around AI, you have personas being taken, all of these things are starting to happen in the world of IT. And the reality of the situation is one of the things that's also critical is over and above encryption. What's important is you are absolutely guaranteed that that message that you're sending is going to the intended recipient. And you guarantee it's not to a device, but actually to a human being. And this is the other really important point that I think is critical that corporates consider as a mechanism to make sure they have in place in order to protect themselves. So Trevor, I hope that answered the question. It's a bit long way around, but
yeah, I wanted to sorry, Alan, I was going to just add that I think one of the, obviously, Christo, you've spoken a lot about the tools that we can use and what we can do to put together a better infrastructure and communication within a business. But that still leaves a massive open hole in terms of our human error, which is the largest risk in terms of cybersecurity. So I think, yes, putting the tools in place is one thing, but I think also training your staff and making sure that they are aware of all of the risks and the ways that these very intelligent cyber criminals are attacking us nowadays. We were actually discussing yesterday, I think Yo will put together a nice kind of not a training deck, but just a PDF of something that we can share of ways in which you can actually train your staff and make sure that they're aware of the different ways that cyber criminals can actually attack. Because, you know, yes, there's clicking on links and things, but they're very smart nowadays. So we've got to be more.
Can I just add to that, though, Sarah, because it's a really good point. But authenticated communication means that you're eliminating phishing. You basically authenticate who's sending, who's receiving. You're creating your own sandbox effectively where it's impossible for impersonation. So you're averting penetration. And that's what we do. We authenticate who's sending what and who's receiving what at all stages. And just to add one other point to Christo's comments about GDPR, etc., the new Cyber Resilience Act will be passed and have assent from the beginning of next year. It's been through the parliamentary process. It just needs adoption. At that point, every one of us in business today will be responsible for to prove our cyber resilience and to put in place process in order to protect our companies. And so there's another level that of expectation and business legislation, let's say, that we have to apply at all stages to enhance our own security.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah. So really good points then. You know, when we start talking about compliance, when we start talking about regulated industries, when we talk about human errors and, you know, the sizing of tools that customers have that, you know, could be quite substantial. I think to get to it, what makes Yayo different? What do you address in those issues we've just discussed?
Yeah, so I can take that one. So Yo, it stands for Your Eyes Only. We built it with the idea of putting back the control in the hands of the user. So we've touched on it, you know, in previous discussions, but what really sets us apart is our continuous facial recognition. So we are continuously ensuring that the person who opens up the message is the intended person. So even if someone picks up your phone or they manage to kind of hack in using your passcode, once they hit Yo messaging application, it will be using our own facial recognition to authenticate once again. And if it doesn't see you every few seconds, it will blur the content. So yeah, our whole idea for the application is around control. So we've actually disabled screenshots, so people cannot even screenshot the conversation. You can't forward, you can't copy, you can't do anything really. You can't save a piece of content unless the sender gives you permission to. So we also have things like geofencing to allow the sender to also control where you view messages. So I could set it to your office, Trevor, and as soon as you leave the office, you can no longer access the message thread that we have together. And then we also have other features which you'll see in other applications, but we've got to have them in there. Things like burn after reading, so we can actually decide who sees the message, where they see it, and for how long that they can have access to it before it's deleted. So yeah, we're kind of like we like to call it this, but I don't really know if we should say it, but we call it like a WhatsApp on privacy steroids. Giving businesses a way of knowing exactly who they're talking to at all stages.
Yeah, and Sarah, I think those are all great points, and I see those as being the sort of advantages of our technology from the application point of view. In other words, what's sitting on the phone per se. But I think we also add value to corporate customers, but that really is around the fact that we have this administration console. Yeah. So the IT administrator themselves control who comes to the network. So yes, you have the facial recognition, absolutely, and that's guaranteeing who you're delivering the data to. But as Alan was alluding to, the fact that it's a private network where only you can join that network if essentially you have an invite from the IT manager is the only way you can join. There's no other way to join. And I like to go back to my story when I arrived in Dubai on a business trip, and I suddenly got like 500 messages from people. I didn't even know who they were. And they just started talking to me on all sorts of things around crypto, to whether I want to hire a June buggy or not, all this sort of stuff. So the idea of having that private network is an important point. And then lastly, the other point I would make is this whole thing about this administration panel having this capability where you can essentially call up any message, you can search for a particular message, you can download every conversation between, let's say, myself and Alan, to make sure that you have met the compliance scenarios. And I'm sure a lot of the corporates that are on the call today have all been caught out with some kind of HR issue or some issue with a customer. And it's very, very difficult today out of the tools that they have to actually go down and download the information on the conversations. Sorry, to you, Alan.
Yeah, sorry.
For example, I see.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, very well, thank you.
Oh, no, it's fine. Apologies. I've got a bit of background noise on here. So go on, Alan.
Yeah, sorry. I was just about to say, just to take up on what Sarah and Christo have been saying. Let's real time. How does Yo help? So first of all, look at Marks and Spencer's. You avert penetration by having identity bound and geofenced messaging systems. If you always know who's there and their identity behind every single message is linked to every message, imposters cannot get in. That's the first thing. So they can do the social engineering and all the rest, but they just can't get in. So it eliminates phishing, which is, no matter how all of us try, there is always going to be one, and dare I say, idiot in our organizations that's going to hit the button. And under spear phishing, which I've been I've had after the Marks and Spencer's attack, you get tired. You suddenly click on something, and away you go, and the gates are open. But also, let's look at speed of response. Marks and Spencer's did a good job, but under new cyber resilience, the Cyber Resilience Act, in a year's time, they could be inspected and they say, well, how did you respond to this? What happened here? Who responded there? And if they, and I don't believe that they did have an out of band communication system. If any of that was done using consumer-based applications, they will be fined because they will not be able to show an audit path at any stage. Whereas with Yo and the admin panel, you always have the audit. And then, which obviously influences containment. It improves your capability to respond at any time. And if you're operating on an out-of-band platform, irrespective of how disabled your own internal systems are, you have a messaging protocol in order to respond, to assemble the teams properly, and to have an audit trail of your management process as such.
Thank you very much for that. Just from a business standpoint, we spoke about Slack, WhatsApp, and Teams. Where does Yayo better this for organisations at the moment?
So, Trevor, I'll take that one. So I guess, where your question is, why would somebody look at using something like Yo over, let's say, other products that are out there? And I think it's around philosophy. That's the way I would sort of frame it. Is Yo's philosophy is to say, look, we want to provide all the benefits of an instant messaging platform. The platform has really been built from the ground up, taking the mobile first approach, but at the same time also making sure that security is at the height of the core of the technology. So it's all about making sure that we adopt technology that has this whole scenario around security and security first, while at the same time also offering the benefits of privacy. So as an example, let me give you an example. So in Yo technology today, there is encryption. So there's the privacy part. But even though there's encryption between the two parties, we also give the auditability, which is what you would get from the corporate product set. But if you were to look at it from a corporate perspective, most of the corporate products that are out there today don't offer encryption. If you look at the consumer products, they offer encryption. So we're sort of sitting in that space between essentially what the corporate product offers and taking the best of the worlds of the corporate product from the compliance perspective. But at the same time, what we're doing is we're also taking the best points that are available in the consumer products. Signal, Telegram, WhatsApp would be a good example. And we're combining these two things together to really provide a solution, which is an instant messaging solution. So it's not a collaboration tool. It's an instant messaging tool that is really around making sure that we can protect corporates. And I think a really, really important point is it's not only about protecting people within the network itself, but it's also about avoiding what I call data leakage, which is this whole thing about I send you a document and then you send that document onto somebody else. So we have the capability of the technology to make sure that things like documents can actually stay within a network and within that secure environment if they're required. So, so Trevor, the way I would put it is Yo is all about being that messaging app on steroids. It's really that tech that is a hybrid between what you offer on a corporate-based messaging solution, which are really becoming more collaboration tools, and essentially what you would have in more of a consumer-based application.
So you get the instancy of messaging, but you have the independence and the security of out-of-band communication, basically.
Yeah.
And again, just going back to the point of authenticated, you have an authenticated, secure platform.
Excellent. Okay, so at the moment, I'll ask everybody, if you've got any questions, please feel free to drop it in. But I'd like to ask my actual own question before I lead into some of the ones that we got in previous.
Open, Trevor. I just had a look. I don't think people can write. It says the chat.
Okay.
It is.
It should be open. Yeah, I can see it is there. So from my point of view, when we talk about the capabilities that Yayo could bring to the table, if I put two scenarios together, I'd like to understand what your kind of thought process was on that. So if, for example, Marks and Spencers were, this is just a recent one that we mentioned earlier in the call, was using Yayo as their platform. Crisis hits. Their communications or their IT systems are now, in jeopardy. What would have happened if they had a Yayo tool? Or what could they have done if we had Yayo from day dot? I think that's a good point I'd like to ask.
Okay, I'll take that. So first of all, we believe that the likelihood of that situation arising in the first place would have been far slimmer than we would have been able to prevent the phishing side of those attacks. the penetration. And the penetration came in through emulating an IT professional who was servicing Marks and Spencer's. So that IT professional would have had to been validated. They would have had to been authenticated and had biometric a biometric match in order to send or receive information. So the imposter bit would have been, you would not been able to break that in the first place. Secondly, Yo, once the hit occurred, they shut down their systems completely. Marks and Spencer's responded by closing. It wasn't that the attack shut the system down. Marks and Spencer's realized it was going on and they shut their whole systems down. And then they started to communicate over social media, etc. So Yo would have offered they would have been able to immediately communicate with their whole company and their supplier chain who would have been enrolled into the Yo system. So you would, for instance, if they had installed Yo, so their key, it could have been just the breach team, it could have been the whole of the organization, the company. Typically in an enrollment, in a breach, there are multiple types of breach. So we could have had a group chat for each of the types of breach. They initiate the message, hey, listen, hit the red button, whatever. The breach has happened, and it would alert immediately a breach team, which would have included outside sources to Marks and Spencer's. So their time to react would have been much faster. Their audit trail on reaction would have been much cleaner. And I don't have information on that, but I imagine that's going to be a nightmare to unravel. And influencing containment, basically. Immediately, the ability to very quickly communicate in an out-of-band messaging platform would enable you to rapidly respond. And time is money. The more when you look at, even with insurance, first notice of loss is typically up to 45 days that people are taking. They get hit by a cyber event, and excuse me for saying, but the shit hits the fan. All the rehearsals and everything else do not prepare you for that type of environment. And there are so many different types of cyber events that can evolve, from ransomware to breach of services, etc. And many different areas. In a multinational, you have different legislative requirements on reporting depending on which country you're in. So, some countries you have to report within six hours, some could be 60 days. And all of these need to be considered and could be assembled in pre-packed group chats within Yo messaging.
Excellent. So yeah, certainly can speed up the response times. So thanks for people firing some questions. We will certainly get to those very shortly. A couple of ones we had ahead of time for attendees on the call today. One was around the continuous facial recognition. How does it actually work in Yo?
Yes, I can take that one. So we use the front camera of your device to sample your face biometrics in real time. So when you're looking at the phone, which obviously to read a message, it's very natural. You're looking at your phone. We're using the front camera to actively ensure that it is your face that has been registered. And even if it works very seamlessly. So if you look away from the camera and you look back, when you look away, the content will blur. And it also picks up kind of shoulder surfing. So if you're on a busy tube, or if you're on the bus or whatever, and someone's looking over your shoulder, it can actually pick that up as well, and it will blur the screen. So it's seamless. We've made sure we wanted it to be something that is very usable. It's sensitive, but not sensitive enough that you're there trying to find, your face and things like that. And even if I can just touch on the the sign up process is also, it takes 10 seconds. It literally registers your face within 10 seconds. You take a picture, the picture has to match the biometric that you've just registered. So the setup of it is also really quick, and we've made sure that the process of onboarding is as smooth as possible.
Yeah, usability, it's taken us a long time to meld usability with the messaging platform. We didn't want behavioral change. And basically what we're doing is we take six frames a second. So every second we check that face 6 times minimum, and we can check up to 28 times. So if you have a situation where somebody's looking at a message and you flip it to show somebody else, the message will blank immediately. If you're in an environment where you're reading a message and somebody suddenly comes here behind you, the message will blank immediately if it sees 2 faces. And then when we've got scenarios in our future product with video, if people are actually like, for instance, we've got Tim, Valentino's slogan on my screen here, none of them are on screen. I can recognize some of the names, but I have no idea if it's truly them. This would validate them biometrically to approve them on this call. So we go way beyond just securing the network. You're confidently able to disseminate information across Yo messaging, knowing that it's under control at all times. So there's no breach of confidentiality. There's absolute security. You can't copy forward, and as Sarah said, screenshot. So
one thing we should also mention is we've had a lot of demand for just the facial recognition piece, which is why we created the SDK. So, people are actually taking and realizing the value in having that constant authentication and plugging it into their own platforms. So yeah, that's just what I should mention, because we've spoken a lot about messaging, but obviously there's use cases where people need that constant authentication, maybe in another scenario.
Yeah,
excellent. Okay, so we're having a few questions flow through now. So I'd like to pull up one that Louise has kindly put into the Q&A. So your tool uses biometrics, which are a special category data. What is your lawful basis for this product with a company, which a company can rely on to justify such a system? People are sensitive about anybody holding their images with good reason. And why should company employees be expected to provide their image when misuse of such information could mean that their identity can be cloned? Great question. Who would like to?
Brilliant.
I'll take that one. I'll take it. That's a great question. I love it.
That one.
Yeah, we all want to take it because we love it. So I think the thing I would say, Trevor, to answer that question is our technology is very clever the way it works. So the first thing is when you go through the phases of registering your face, all of that information of those pictures that we use as the basis of building the biometric profile are essentially stored on the phone. So nothing actually is stored on any server or in any environment that's sitting in the cloud. It's all stored locally on your phone. Now, the technology is a little bit more clever than that, because what it's actually doing is when we build that profile, what we're actually looking at is points on your face. It's actually 143 points that we're actually looking at. And that builds what we call the biometric algorithm or a biometric tracker number. And when we're doing the comparisons to check, is it the right person? Really, what we're doing is we're looking at those biometric numbers. We're not actually looking at the physical picture itself. And all of those pictures that we do take, all of those reside on your phone, and they're fully encrypted, and they never, ever go and sit on any server anywhere.
Yeah. In fact, we don't store pictures at all. So
exactly, yeah. So one of the real critical things that brings is it helps with GDPR, of course, because that's essentially helping you from that perspective too. So I hope it answers the question.
Excellent, thank you very much. So who is using Yayo? So going back to a couple of the questions we have been sent to us prior, who is already using the Yayo platform?
Yeah, so we've got quite a strong adoption today around people using and looking at Yo. But I would say that the way to look at it at a high level is it's really those sectors where trust and compliance is important for them. But it's people like defense, government, challenger banks, executive teams, people involved in M&A or people worried about, intellectual property. Health organizations is another area. Sarah's deeply involved in a pilot with a medical organization which passes a lot of confidential photos, because that's another situation. And they're doing a lot of patient records and that sort of scenario. So really anywhere where trust and compliance is critical, and they have some form of regulation, could be in a situation where it would play. So it's sitting in those areas where I would say people worry tremendously around compliance and trust. That's where it's going to play.
Yeah.
And I think that the other thing is the issue that we have as a company is the breadth of use of the product. So we can give you examples like this morning, for instance, we've signed up a contract with a company that we use our biometrics for wallet against wallets in crypto. So the anonymity of a wallet holder is really can be very important, but a biometric match in order to using for transactional use of that wallet will be going ahead with Yo messaging. But we've got situations where we have marriage guidance counseling using Yo messaging. Because if you think of a situation, and it could be an HR situation or whatever, you need confidence that nobody else is going to compromise your integrity and your confidentiality at any stage. And Yo offers that capability. So that it's a brilliant use case. We were described the other day that the guys, there was a wife and a husband scenario, and that they were previously doing this communication on WhatsApp, and nobody knew what the hell was going on with those messages. Whereas with Yo, you control it even after you've hit send. With anything else in my understanding in the world today, you have no control once you hit send. So military, government, corporates, in a plethora of different
Manufacturing, healthcare.
Yeah, from manufacturing and healthcare. As I said, marriage guidance, crypto, insurance.
Makes my marketing job very interesting.
Yeah.
I keep on going to the guys, we need to focus, but obviously we get so many different industries that need and require this type of high level encrypted, verified communication. So yeah, there's a lot of avenues, but we're being trialed by a lot of different industries to date.
And legal is the other one.
Yeah.
Legal disclosure is something that's is a great one for Yo too.
Absolutely. So excellent. Thank you very much for that. So we've had a question come through into the chat bits from Valentino. So thank you very much for this. So in summary, what should a company consider when choosing an instant messaging application for a business? Who would like to attempt that question? Thank you very much for sending it.
I can do. First of all, compliance. Any company today using any communication product needs to be compliant with regulation. There's heavy regulation throughout the USA, Europe. Most countries have some form of cyber resilience compliance, and then GDPR. We are sending documents, photographs, pictures today in business using consumer-based applications. And when you do that, you're breaking the law. And it's only a matter of time before somebody will catch up with you, and the regulatory process will take place, and you'll be paying 5% or so of your gross profit as a fine. So you need to have an authenticated, controlled environment for your messaging communications within your business. And whether you like it or not, people demand the instancy of messaging today. It has to be part of your corporate arsenal for communication. And if not, you're going to be left behind, and you're going to encourage your employees to break rank and use consumer-based applications. So
yeah, and Adam, I'd add one more really important point, which we haven't really touched on at all today, and that's data sovereignty. So the one of the key things that is important when considering buying a messaging solution is, where is that data with all the messaging residing? So as an example, if you're talking consumer apps, that data is probably going to reside on a server somewhere in America. It doesn't reside here in the United Kingdom. And the reality is the rules associated to accessing that data are very different in the US to what they are here in the United Kingdom. So one of the key things around assessing and buying a messaging solution is to say, okay, well, where does that data actually reside, and how much control do I have over that data? The second point to that is this issue around GDPR. And this is where people really don't understand the risks that they have with using consumer grade apps. So I always like to refer to WhatsApp. When I say WhatsApp, I'm really referring to all of the technologies that are used in that consumer world. What a lot of people now know is that consumer app like WhatsApp, they're actually selling the metadata. So when I communicate with a customer using WhatsApp, really what's happening there is I'm giving the right to Meta to go and sell all the information related to those conversations, not necessarily the actual text in the conversations, but who I spoke to, how I spoke to them, when I spoke to them, what location I was at, how frequently I spoke to. All of that information Meta then can sell to any third party that wants to have that information to direct advertising to them. And that's when they break the GDPR rules. So I think it's also about understanding not only the data sovereignty, but how's that message flow actually going to work, and how am I protecting my company in that message flow construct? And that's where it becomes critical for corporates to consider.
Excellent, thank you. So one of the questions I would presume has come through from one of our IT guests on the webinar today. What does implementation look like for a business using the AO platform? Because that's going to be key when we're talking about how complex or how straightforward a solution is. Again, to how a business appetite is to looking at this.
Yeah. So the way I would answer that, Trevor, is remember that what we wanted to make sure is that we have the same look, feel as the consumer grade applications. So the first thing to understand is our client is available on iOS, it's available on Android, it's available on Mac desktop, and it's available on Windows desktop. So when we want to distribute the product, we use the relevant Play Store. So we'd use, for instance, the Apple Store to download the iOS technologies. If you wanted to download it on your Microsoft desktop, you can go to the Microsoft Store and you can download it. So the idea of the technology is that it's very accessible to users, and it's very easy for them to get access to the actual application. Where the real cleverness comes in is we mentioned we had a centralized server. That centralized server can be hosted on any kind of platform, so that being Google Cloud, Azure, AWS as an example. So any cloud platform that's there. It's normally sitting in the corporate's cloud environment. That gives them data ownership, which is what we were talking around data sovereignty. And how the technology works is at the IT administrator level, they would decide who they want to invite to the platform. The user would get an email on their traditional email platform. It would direct them to the relevant store, whether it's the Apple Store, the Android Store, the Microsoft Store, or the Mac Store, to go and download their client. And automatically they would click on that link that would then take them into installing the application, and then they would just register, as simple as that. So it's not a complicated environment, doesn't involve, hours and hours and hours of infrastructural heavy lifting in order to make this work. It's a really simplistic approach.
Excellent. Okay, so where we talked about earlier the plan in an event of a cyber crisis, effectively you could have the application installed in your own environment, but also a hosted environment where that's out of your network, out of bounds for just your plan when things hit the fan, as they say. Yes,
exactly. Yeah. So I mean that's an important point, right? Because this whole thing around cyber, protection is the one part which is the upfront protection, but it's also around having the technology in place, which we call out-of-band communications, and that's for protecting an organization when the disaster strikes. So how am I going to deal with that? How am I going to distribute my call tree when I have a massive disaster on my plate?
Excellent, thank you. Another great question from Louise, which we haven't really spoke too much in depth about backup, but Louise's questions around how does archiving work with this product? I think that's a very good question. Thanks, Louise, again.
Okay, so a great question, Louise, and thanks for it. So how the backup side works? So the first thing is you as the IT administrator can decide on how long you want to keep that those messages in place. It can be as little as 7 days and could go on for the entire history of the product. So you can decide, firstly, what the data retention period is for all of those individual messages. Now, what we're actually doing is when we're writing to the backup portion, we're actually using S3 storage. That's the technology we're using, which basically means it can be federated. And generally, it could sit on any cloud platform, basically anywhere in the world that you want it to sit in. And essentially, you would then write into that platform. Then, on top of that, if that's still not good enough protection for you, we give you the capability to then download those messages, and you can then store those messages onto any archive platform that you'd want to store them on. So it's quite a number of levels that we provide. Really.
And the search features are also really key. So from a compliance point of view, you can do keyword search through your messaging platform, etc. So we've thought about it from and attacked the storage or the backup from a compliance point of view, which I think is really key. We don't want to be through maps of messages after messages, etc.
I was going to just mention as well, we've obviously studied our competitors in the space, I would say, in terms of how they manage backup, and feedback that we've had was that it's a nightmare to ever have to download conversations or to get access to certain communication threads. And so we've tried to make ours as easy and seamless and usable as possible.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, everybody. So, but if we have no further questions, I'd like to firstly thank the panelists today, Christo, Sarah, and Alan, for joining us. I hope that everybody saw some value in what we were talking about today and the ever rising challenges that you are all facing. You see now that there is a need for secure messaging, and it's more critical than ever. And we firmly believe here that we've got a platform with Yaya that can help you in your challenges, and it's a business-ready solution. And it's as Christo mentioned, the implementation is extremely quick, which is again useful. So all I'll ask everybody who's attended this call, we will send you an email with a recap of what we've discussed today. I'd like to invite you all to get in touch and arrange demos or trials and have a look at the product in more detail. We'll also be putting the webinar onto YouTube as well. So with that being said, thank you everybody for your time today. We hope you found value, and we look forward hopefully to discussing the solution further with you all.
Thanks, Trevor, for inviting us.
Have a good day.
Excellent. Bye. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye.
Bye.